It's time to make it. Just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Welcome to this episode of You Can Make It with David Farrell, the old fat guy. That's me. I'm going to make something that you should be making all the time because it is so easy and it's so good, and that's breakfast sausage. When you go and buy sausage in the store, you don't know what's going in them. They grind up cuttings and they use commercial seasoning mixes. It's so easy to make it yourself and know exactly what's in it. So today we're going to make OFG breakfast sausage. It's simplicity itself to make. The first thing you have to do is find the right pork. You can't just go buy lean pork. You have to buy pork that's at least about 20% fat. And if you buy pork shoulder or pork butt, it pretty well has about 20% fat mixed through it. But if it looks like it's been trimmed really lean, talk to the butcher and get him to give you a little bit of his trimmings off of it to add to it to get the pork fat up to about 20%. And then you just want to cube it into about 1-inch cubes for your grinder, which I have done. And then you need to add some seasonings that you're going to toss the cubes in. And the seasonings I'm going to be using, I'll usually measure them by weight, by grams. That's because you get a consistent sausage every time, no matter how you chop it. But it's a lot easier to measure by milliliters or teaspoons, so I'll give you both. You decide which one you want to work with. We'll start off with, I have 12.5 grams salt, which is 6.5 milliliters or 1.5 teaspoons. I have 2.2 grams or 3 milliliters, which is a half teaspoon of black pepper. I have 2.2 grams or 10 milliliters, which is 2 teaspoons of chopped fresh sage, or you could use dry sage, but then you'd use 0.7 grams or 1 milliliter or 1/4 of a teaspoon. I have 0.65 grams or 1 milliliter or 1/4 of a teaspoon of ground ginger. I have 1 gram or 5 milliliters chopped fresh thyme, or you can substitute 0.5 grams, which is 1.5 milliliters or 1/3 of a teaspoon of dried thyme. I have 0.9 grams of dried chipotle, which is the equivalent of 1/4 teaspoon or 1 milliliter. If you can't get chipotle where you are, substitute it with half the amount of cayenne. And just add those spices into the cubes of meat. And then you want to toss them around to coat. You want to get them well coated in the spice mixture. Now, something you need to know about making sausage. The pork must be kept cold at all times. If it gets warm, the fat can separate out and you'll get a horrible texture. So whenever you're not doing anything with the pork, make sure you put it in the fridge and make sure it's been in the fridge for a good long time before you start. So I've got the meat all covered with the seasonings, so I need to set up my grinding station to grind up the pork into the sausage. And guess what I'll be doing? Just like I told you, this will go in the fridge while I set up the grinding station, and I'll see you in a second. So I took the pork back out of the refrigerator and I set up my grinder attachment on my stand mixer. Now you can use the hand grinder roll ones. They work just fine. They just take a bit longer, or you can buy a dedicated machine just for grinding meat. This works fine for just a couple of pounds. So we're going to fire it up and I'm just going to grind the meat through. And that's the last of the meat. There we go. So our meat is all ground up into sausage. Now, the trick is to get it to mix up and get a little bit better consistency. We're going to do some mixing by hand. So I'm just going to get a couple more things, put the meat in the freezer for a minute, or in the fridge for a minute. I'll be right back with you. So the pork is nice and chilled, and I've got it out on my pan, and I'm just going to how do you like that for a wordplay? I'm going to poke some holes in it, and I have here 1/4 cup of water. It just helps with the consistency of it. So nice cold water, just pour it over the pork. Now I'm going to mix it by hand for 3 minutes. It just gives a better consistency so the pork sticks together better as sausage. And the way I mix it is I fold it over in half, press it down, turn the pan 1/4 turn, fold it over, press it down, and I'm just going to keep folding it over and pressing it down for 3 minutes. Okay, my pork's been mixed for 3 minutes now, and you'll see it's got a bit of a pasty texture, but still has chunks of meat in it. If you like your pork really fine, like it closer to what comes out of the supermarkets, you can run the meat through the grinder twice instead of just once, and then you'll mix it for even longer. But this is the consistency I like my sausage to be in. Now at this point you have some choices. You can go and buy a sausage stuffer and some collagen casings and stuff your sausage into it and get it like they come in the store. Or you can make patties out of it. Just grab about a golf-sized ball size piece of meat, roll it, and press it flat. And do that and make them all into sausage patties and then just cook them up. So I'm just going to start rolling a few sausage patties, and I'll see you in a minute. I made my sausages into patties, and here's some here, and of course you got to try one. Now these will actually have a more even spice flavor the next day, but I can't resist. I just have to try cooking a couple. So just take your patty and put it in a medium fry pan over medium heat, and you're going to cook it through. Now if you really want your sausages in links, in casings, if you go to my blog, oldfatguy.ca, I show you how to do that. But there's no need. It just makes them look better and gives them a prettier presentation. So we'll just cook these sausages up and give them a taste. The problem with a lot of people in cooking sausages is they overcook them. Your sausage should be cooked to 155 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's it. So I like to use an instant read thermometer and just push it into the center, and if it's over 155, I just take it off. There we go. And we'll just shut down my stove, and let's give it a taste. Nice and juicy, look at that. Nice and soft. That doesn't have as much salt as the commercial, but enough salt to give it flavor. The herbs just really give it some depth, especially the sage and a little touch of thyme. And the little bit of chipotle, just not, if you don't like heat, you'll be fine, but it gives it a little something back there. This is a truly great breakfast sausage. And the best part is, you can make it.
In this episode, David made OFG Breakfast Sausage. The ingredients used are 1 kilogram of pork shoulder, 6.5 milliliters of table salt, 3 milliliters of black pepper, 10 milliliters of chopped fresh sage or 1 milliliter of ground sage, 1 milliliter of ground ginger, 5 milliliters of chopped fresh thyme or 1.5 milliliters of dried thyme, 1 milliliter of ground chipotle, and 50 milliliters of cold water. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. Remember, you can make it. It's time to make it. Just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Welcome to another episode of You Can Make It with David Farrell, the old fat guy. I have had an absolutely wonderful crop of potatoes this year, so I've got potatoes coming out my ears. That's good, but I don't want any to go to waste. So I need a way to use up some potatoes and store them well into the winter without them going bad. It's the same thing if you get a buy or a sale on a whole big bag of potatoes and you want to get a cheap price, but you don't want them to go to waste. So I'm going to make something called a frozen mashed potato casserole. It's quite simple to make and it's a good way to store potatoes. In addition to being a good way to store potatoes, it's also a recipe. If you cut it in half, you can make it one day when you're having company the next day and just have to reheat it. Let's get into making a frozen mashed potato casserole. We'll start off with, you need 3.5 kilograms or 7.5 pounds of peeled and chopped potatoes. Now I've done most of mine. I just got one left. So I'm just going to peel the potato. There we go. And then I want to cut it into chunks so it cooks a little bit faster. And put it in some water in a pot with the rest of the potatoes. Now, it's important, especially for me, that I add some salt to the water because I live at high altitude. And believe it or not, water boils lower temperature at high altitude than it does at sea level. So I'm just going to put a bit of salt in my water. Just a teaspoon or so, just to give it a bit higher boiling point. And then I'm going to turn my cooktop on, bring it to a boil, put the lid on, and simmer it for 20 to 25 minutes until the potatoes are really soft. It might take a little less time if you're at a lower altitude, but start checking it at about 20 minutes and make sure that they're really soft, but I'll show you that when they're finished cooking. The potatoes actually cooked about 25 minutes to get fully cooked. Remember I told you about the higher altitude problem. And I just stick a fork in it. It should go in very, very easily. And that does. So now I just have to drain the water off my potatoes. So we'll just get the lid. Here it is. Put it on and go over to the sink and drain the water off. So now that the potatoes are drained, I'm just going to clear a bit of space to work here and I'll be right back with you. I drained the water off of the potatoes and I set up my area here to add the remaining ingredients that I need to make the mashed potatoes. And guess what you do to start making mashed potatoes? You mash them. Good old-fashioned potato masher I find works better than almost anything. So I've been mashing the potatoes for 2 or 3 minutes. I want to get them nice and well mixed and crushed up. And we'll start putting some other ingredients in them. We're going to start off with some green onions. I've cut up 250 milliliters or 1 cup of green onions that I'm going to be adding to this, but only half of it. The other half are going to be used for garnish later, so we're just going to put half of the green onions in. And give it a little bit more of a mash. And then we're going to add some other ingredients. So what we're going to start with is 250 milliliters of, or 1 cup of milk, 250 milliliters or 1 cup of cream cheese, 15 milliliters of Italian herb seasoning, and 5 milliliters of coarse ground pepper. and 1/4 cup or 50 milliliters of butter, and 2 eggs that you just want to beat up a little bit. Now you noticed I put the eggs in last. That's because I got all those ingredients that'll be cooling the potatoes a bit so the eggs won't turn into scrambled eggs when I put them in. I'll just put them on top of those things. And we'll just beat those up a little bit with a fork. There we go, and then the eggs go in. And now we're going to mash that all together until it's nice and smooth. There we go, nice creamy mashed potatoes, as you can see. Now, what makes them a casserole is you cook them in a casserole dish. I'm going to have some of these for dinner tonight, so I'm actually going to put some in a casserole that I'll cook up for dinner. But what you can do with these is put it in a casserole and leave it in the fridge overnight and cook it tomorrow. Or you can put them in foil pans of any size you like and then cover them with foil and put them in the freezer and bring them out when you want to use them. Now, the trick is if you're cooking them unfrozen, in other words, you took them out of the freezer and you thawed them, or you're cooking them after making them, you cook them at 375 for 50 minutes. If you get caught really short, you can take them right out of the freezer and put them in a 350-degree oven for 60 minutes, and it works out almost as well. So let's just scoop this into my casserole and get it ready for tonight because it's still got to be garnished. Now you can make it as thick or as thin as you want depending on how many people you want to serve from the casserole. It's just my wife and I, so I'm not going to make this one too deep. That should about do the two of us. You can fill it right to the top if you want more. I'll put a little bit more in. I like my potatoes. So now that you've got it into a casserole, you're going to take out and put in, excuse me, I forgot something to get out here. I have here 175 milliliters or 3/4 of a cup of cheddar. And remember the half of the onions we had before? Well, you want to sprinkle some of them over the casserole. And you save the rest for the other casseroles you put in the freezer or whatever. But you just want a little bit of color. So there we go. And then you want to sprinkle some of the grated shredded cheddar cheese. Just put some of that over your potatoes. There we go. Now, this will go into a 375-degree oven for 50 minutes, and you'll get a nice crust on top from the cheese, and I'll show you what it looks like then. I put the rest of my frozen mashed potato casserole in the foil pans, put the green onions and cheese over them, and now they can go in the freezer so I can enjoy some in February if I want. And you can look, I had one here that I just cooked up for dinner tonight, and you can see it's got a lovely golden crust on it. Best part now is tasting it. It has delicious cheesy crust. The green onions give it a little bit of nice flavor. It's incredibly creamy. This casserole would go great with a roast or a chicken or anything. And best of all, you can make it.
In this episode, David made frozen mashed potato casserole. The ingredients used are 3.5 kilograms of potatoes peeled and cut into chunks, 250 milliliters of chopped green onions, 250 milliliters of milk, 250 milliliters of cream cheese, 15 milliliters of Italian seasonings, 50 milliliters of butter, 2 eggs, 5 milliliters of pepper, and 175 milliliters of shredded cheddar cheese. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. As David would say, you can make it. It's time to make it. Just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
In today's show of You Can Make It, the old fat guy isn't going to cook anything. Instead, he's going to show you how you can chop onions with a chef's knife. Now, this is a chef's knife. It has a curved blade, and it is very sharp. If your knives aren't very sharp, get them sharpened. They're safer and do a better job. Now, to chop an onion, I have 3 different ways. I first cut the onion in half from the stem to the blossom in the end and take the peel off. And then the first method I'm going to do is one of longer, less regular slices. Just cut the root end off and cut lengthwise, starting at an angle, and go through. And when you're just learning, you want to go slowly so you get even slices. As you get experience, you can go faster. And that gives you long, slender slices to use for a recipe, like a gravy, where you want them to spread out amongst the gravy and give you a good display. The second way of chopping an onion is if I want shorter, more controlled, and really the same size. And again, I've taken an onion, I've cut it through the blossom end, lengthwise, and left the root end on this time. And now what you want to do is very carefully just slice through in thin slices. And you can do any thickness you want, and if you take your time, you can make them all exactly the same. And that's good for a different kind of display. Now, as you get better at it, you can go faster, but don't worry about it as you're starting off. Practice slow. The third way is if I need to dice an onion. Now, if you need to dice an onion, again, cut it in half, leave the root end on, cut off any ugly stuff from down there. To dice it, start by cutting some slices this way, being very careful not to let it go into your fingers to the size you want the dice to be. And keep going. And one last slice into the onion. Now, when you note the way I hold my chef's knife when you're chopping, now you want to do up and down to the same size. And you can see some pieces are even falling out as the dice already. And once you've sliced all the way through, then you can just cut your dice to the size you want. So you see, you have a nice even dice. So the next time a recipe calls for chopped onions, you can make it.